Have you ever been cheated on? I'm not talking about some stupid fling or a careless, drunken mistake. No, I mean the kind of betrayal that turns your world inside out. The kind that makes you question every single decision, every conversation, every moment you thought was solid. It sticks with you, even when you think you've moved on. And I'm not sharing this to get pity or attention. I'm telling my story because, like me, some of you need to hear that you're not crazy, and you're definitely not alone. My wife, yeah, she cheated on me. And the worst part? She did it with this smug look, like she really thought I was too dumb to ever catch on. But I did. And trust me, I made sure she felt the sting of regret. In the end, I walked away on top. While she's left to wade through the wreckage of the life she completely tore apart herself. Let me start with her. You'd probably say she was beautiful. Well, she still is, honestly. That hasn't changed. She's one of those women who knows exactly how to turn heads wherever she goes. She's a personal trainer at this fancy gym downtown, the kind of place where a month's membership costs more than I'd pay for a year. She's always decked out in those tight yoga pants, her body sculpted from years of working out, flat stomach, toned legs, and that perfect as she couldn't help but flaunt. Oh, and her long hair flowing down her back like one of those shampoo commercials. Guys couldn't help but stop and stare whenever she walked by. And believe me, she knew it. God, did she know it? I lost count of how many times I caught her checking herself out in mirrors, windows, anything shiny, just to make sure she was still the center of attention. When we first met, I was floored by her looks. I couldn't believe a woman like her would even notice me. But what I didn't see then, and what I came to learn the hard way, was that beneath all that beauty was a nasty, self-centered piece of work. But of course, I didn't figure that out until we were well into our marriage, and by then, it was far too late. See, I run my own small business. It's nothing huge, nothing flashy, but it's mine, and I built it from the ground up. It brings in enough to keep us comfortable. We got a nice house, a couple of cars, all the stuff you'd expect from a couple in their mid-30s who supposedly made it. But somewhere along the line, things started to fall apart between us. Maybe it was the stress, maybe we just drifted apart. Hell if I know. But our relationship started crumbling, and it wasn't exactly subtle. Our sex life? It went from passionate and fun to this routine, lifeless task we do every so often, just to say we did it. It got so bad that she'd roll her eyes whenever I brought it up, like I was begging her for some leftover crumbs of affection. And trust me, no man wants to feel that way in his own marriage. It's straight up humiliating. When we weren't ignoring each other, we were fighting. And it wasn't over anything important. No, it was always over stupid, petty crap. She'd leave the kitchen a mess, and I'd lose it. I'd forget to pick up something on the way home, and she'd act like I'd committed some crime. It was nonstop. No peace, no spark. Just this wall of resentment that seemed to grow taller every day. And then there was her phone. She was glued to that thing, day and night, scrolling, typing, laughing at stuff that had nothing to do with me. When I asked what was so funny, she'd toss out some half-assed excuse like, "Oh, just work stuff." But you know when something's off. You can feel it in your gut. The secrecy, the late nights at the gym long after her shift was over, the constant texting, it was like watching our marriage wither away, one day at a time. We had a group of friends we hung out with a lot, drinks, barbecues, the usual. And there's one woman in the group. Let's call her Emily. Emily? She's different. She's the kind of person who lights up a room without even trying. Funny, smart, and caring. She's the type who actually listens when you talk, not just waiting for her turn to speak. I've known Emily for years, long before my wife even came into the picture. We've always been close friends, and that's all it ever was, at least on the surface. But if I'm being honest, there's always been something more, something unspoken. I've caught her giving me a certain look when she thought I wasn't paying attention, and there were moments when she'd stand just a little closer than necessary. You know the kind of thing I'm talking about. Those subtle signals only the two of you ever notice. But here's the thing, I never acted on it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was trying to be the good guy. I had a wife. I had a marriage. Or at least I thought I did. So even though I felt drawn to Emily, I buried it deep. I didn't cross that line. Not back then anyway. But Emily? She's important to this story. More important than she probably even realizes. Because while my marriage was falling apart, Emily was always in the background, being a better person than my wife ever could be. And in the end, you'll see just how much of a role she played in everything. The cracks in my marriage were getting wider, and even though I could see things slipping away, I had no idea just how bad it was. Not until I found out about the affair. And believe me, that's a whole story in itself. There's this guy my wife worked with. Let's call him Brandon. He was the walking stereotype of a gym rat. All muscles, no brains. You know the type. Always flexing in the mirror like it's a profession. Brandon was the kind of guy who'd throw around words like bro and gains as if they held some deep meaning, convinced that being able to bench press a small car made him special. From the moment I met him, I couldn't stand the guy. But it wasn't just his arrogance that got to me. It was the way he acted around my wife. He was way too comfortable, like they'd been close for years. He'd sling his arm around her shoulder without a second thought, laughing and joking like it was all perfectly normal. Meanwhile, I'd stand there, biting my tongue, try not to lose it. She'd brush it off every time, telling me, "Oh, he's just like that with everyone." But I wasn't buying it. Something about him didn't sit right with me. My gut was screaming at me to keep an eye on him, but I didn't want to be that paranoid, overbearing husband. Maybe that's where I messed up, trusting her more than I should have. So one day, it all seemed like business as usual. I got up, went through the morning routine, kissed her goodbye as she left for work, and dove into my own busy day. Around lunchtime, I swung by the house to grab something I'd forgotten. She wasn't back yet, but her phone was sitting on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't even consider checking it. I'm not the kind of guy to snoop, but the screen was lighting up like crazy with notifications. Something inside me just told me to take a look. Call it instinct or maybe just plain desperation. I was tired of being in the dark. I unlocked her phone. Yeah, I knew her password. And there was a message from him, Brandon. And it wasn't work-related. It was the kind of message that makes your stomach drop before you've even read the whole thing. He was asking her when she'd meet him at their spot. Their spot. My head was spinning, but I couldn't stop myself. I opened the conversation, knowing full well what I was about to find. What I saw hit me like a freight train. Explicit messages, straight-up disgusting stuff. I'm not even going to repeat most of it because it still makes me sick to think about. They weren't just flirting. They were deep into it, sexting naked pictures, making plans for what they were going to do next. And then I saw something that made my blood boil. Brandon had the nerve to call me a wimp. A goddamn wimp. Like I was some clueless fool they could mock while he was screwing my wife behind my back. I'm not going to lie, my first instinct was to lose it. I wanted to smash that phone, storm into that gym, and tear him apart. Hell, I even thought about kicking her out of the house on the spot. But I didn't. Somehow I managed to hold it together. I stood there, gripping the kitchen counter, so hard my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to breathe. I knew if I reacted then and there, I'd just be playing into their hands. They'd expect me to blow up, lose control. No, I needed to be smart about this. I put the phone down, took one last deep breath, and made a decision. If she was going to betray me like this, I wasn't going to sit around and play the victim. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. I was going to take control of this situation, and she was going to regret every choice she made. The first thing I did, I messaged Emily. Yeah, remember her? The friend I've had for years, the one I always had a connection with, but never acted on? I shot her a simple, casual message. Nothing too obvious. Just a "hey, it's been a while. How have you been?" kind of thing. I knew exactly what I was doing. Emily was going to be part of this, whether she realized it or not. She replied pretty quickly, and soon enough, we were chatting like old friends, laughing about past memories, catching up on life. It was all lighthearted, casual. But in the back of my mind, I was laying the groundwork. This wasn't some innocent conversation. I had a plan, and Emily was going to play a role in it, whether she knew it or not. Because here's the thing, I wasn't going to give my wife and that idiot Brandon the satisfaction of a big blow-up. That would be too easy. No, I was going to make them pay in a way they wouldn't see coming. And Emily? She was going to be a key player, more important than even she knew. Seeing the text was bad enough, but the more I read, the worse it got. This wasn't just some fling. They were going at it right there in the gym. The same gym where she worked, where she was supposed to be helping people get in shape. The place where she supposedly built her career and her reputation. And instead, she was screwing around with that moron Brandon. You'd think they'd at least have the decency to keep it out of the workplace. But no, they had to do it right there, like a couple of horny teenagers who couldn't wait for somewhere more private. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. All those late nights, all those excuses about extra clients or having to stay and close up. Yeah, she wasn't staying late for work. She was getting her workout in, just not with any dumbbells. I wasn't about to let this go without a fight. I needed something solid, something undeniable. That's when I remembered the gym had security cameras. Any place as upscale as hers would have cameras everywhere. High-end spots don't mess around with security. The thing is, nobody actually watches that footage unless something serious happens. The staff knows it, and apparently, my wife and Brandon were counting on it. They figured they could do whatever they wanted as long as no one made a complaint. Well, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I waited until the gym closed for the night. I knew they always had a security guard on duty after hours. Some old guy who couldn't care less about anything other than collecting his paycheck. When I got there, it didn't take long to find him. Sure enough, he was sitting at the front desk, eyes half closed, scrolling through his phone. This wasn't a man looking to save the day. He was just passing time. I approached him, keeping my cool. "Hey, I need a favor," I said, pulling a few $100 bills from my wallet. His eyes lit up the moment he saw the cash. "I just need some footage from the last couple of weeks." No big deal. At first, he hesitated, probably wondering if it was worth the risk. But like I said before, money talks. A few $100 likely equaled a week's pay for him, and he didn't need to know what I was really after. After a few seconds of silence, he nodded, glancing around like he was about to break some sacred code. "Just don't mention this to anyone, okay?" He handed me a flash drive with all the security footage from the last 2 weeks. No questions, no forms, just the footage. I thanked him and headed home, feeling like I had a live grenade in my pocket. Back home, I booted up my laptop and plugged in the drive. The file was massive, endless hours of footage from all over the gym. It was impossible to sift through on my own in one night. After a couple of hours, I'd barely seen anything other than people lifting weights, chatting at the front desk, and doing squats. It was a nightmare trying to narrow it down. That's when I thought of Emily. If anyone could help me with this, it was her. Emily was calm, level-headed, and had always had my back, even when I didn't realize I needed it. I sent her a message, keeping it casual. "Hey, can we catch up? I need to talk to you about something." She replied almost immediately, agreeing to meet the next day. When we met up, I didn't sugarcoat anything. I laid it all out. Everything from the messages to the affair, the gym, and now the tapes. Her face shifted from shock to disgust, and then to that deep sympathy I'd always admired in her. She reached over, placing her hand on mine. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You don't deserve this." "Not at all." I nodded, appreciating her words, but I was laser-focused on the task at hand. I showed her the footage and explained how I was overwhelmed with the sheer amount of it. I asked if she could help me find what I was looking for. "Of course," she said, not even hesitating. "We'll get through this. I'll help you find it." So, we sat there side by side, fast-forwarding through hours of footage. We watched countless people going about their routines, keeping an eye on the front desk camera, waiting for any sign of them sneaking off. It was tedious, but Emily didn't complain once. She was patient, steady, and quietly supportive, exactly what I needed in that moment, though I didn't fully realize it. Finally, after what felt like forever, we found it. Brandon and my wife, slipping into one of the back rooms. I paused the video, took a deep breath, and hit play. There they were, laughing, touching, completely unaware they were being recorded. They didn't even bother checking if the cameras were on. The arrogance was unbelievable. They really thought they were untouchable. It was all there, every filthy detail. Proof. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of it all crash down on me. I had what I needed, but now what the hell was I supposed to do with it? How do you even begin to process something like that? Emily, sensing how overwhelmed I was, poured us both a glass of wine. We sat there in silence for a while, the footage still playing in the background, though I wasn't paying attention to it anymore. I just felt numb. When it was time for Emily to leave, we hugged. It was meant to be a friendly hug, but it lasted longer than I expected. Her arms wrapped around me in a way that felt comforting, safe, like she understood exactly what I was going through without me having to say a word. When I finally pulled back, I thanked her. "I don't know what I'd do without you," I said, meaning every word. She smiled, but there was something sad in her eyes. "I'm always here for you," she replied softly. I nodded and headed home, but my mind was racing. I had the proof. I had Emily's support, but I couldn't just blow everything up yet. I had to play my part a little longer, keep pretending to be the clueless, oblivious husband. Timing was everything. When I made my move, it had to be perfect. With that footage in hand, I knew I couldn't sit on it forever. There was no point in dragging things out, pretending everything was fine when it was clearly anything, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not just at her, but at myself. How the hell had I let it get this far? How did I not see the signs sooner? I didn't want some private, behind-closed-doors confrontation. No, she deserved to be exposed in front of the people she thought she could manipulate so easily. So, I came up with a plan. I suggested to my wife that we throw a party for one of our mutual friends. Naturally, she jumped at the idea. She loved playing the perfect hostess, loved being the center of attention. Little did she know, this was exactly what I needed to set everything in motion. When the night of the party rolled around, the house was packed. Friends laughing, drinking, having a great time. And there she was, mingling with everyone, putting on her usual show, all smiles and charm, like nothing in the world was wrong. She acted like she wasn't sneaking around behind my back, and it took everything in me not to lose it right then and there. But I stuck to the plan. Once the party was in full swing, I grabbed the remote and stood up in front of the TV. "Hey everyone, I got something I want to show you," I said, keeping my tone casual. She glanced over at me, probably thinking I was about to put on some dumb video or sports highlights. But when I hit play, the room went dead silent. At first, people were confused, unsure of what they were watching. But as the image on the screen became clear, her and Brandon sneaking into the back room of the gym, the realization hit. The room erupted in gasps, whispers, and the sound of drinks being set down on tables. Her? She just froze, her face going pale as she watched herself on the screen, caught in the act. I could hear a few people murmur. Someone said, "Jesus Christ," while another muttered, "That's disgusting." Some of our friends just stood there in awkward silence, clearly not knowing where to look. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. It was like a bomb had just gone off, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The footage spoke for itself. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew what was happening. And I knew from that moment on, no one would look at her the same way again. Her perfect little image? Shattered. Her lies? Exposed. And our marriage? Over. I walked out of the house without a second glance. I didn't need to hear her excuses, her fake apologies, or whatever nonsense she'd try to throw at me. I just needed air. I needed to clear my head, so I walked. No real destination. Just pacing around the neighborhood, my hands jammed into my pockets, replaying everything that had just happened in my mind. I was angry, of course, but more than that, I felt like a fool. How had I let this happen? How had I missed all the signs that had been right in front of me for so long? I wasn't just a victim here. I had ignored the red flags, convinced myself that things would get better, when really, I had just been playing right into her hands. As I was walking, a car pulled up beside me. I looked over and saw Emily in the driver's seat. She rolled down the window and called out, "Want to go for a ride?" I didn't even think twice. I just nodded and got in. We drove for a while in complete silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Emily had been at the party. She saw the footage. She knew exactly what had gone down, and there wasn't much left to say. Eventually, she drove us to this quiet spot on the outskirts of town, a place I didn't even know existed. It was up on a hill, overlooking the city. The lights twinkled below us in the night, and the air was still and cool. It was peaceful, the exact opposite of the chaos I had just walked away from. Emily got out of the car and went to the trunk, pulling out a blanket. "I come here sometimes," she said softly as she spread it out on the ground. "It's a good place to think." We sat down side by side, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we talked, really talked, about my marriage, about how long she'd suspected something was off, about how she felt. The more we talked, the more I realized how comfortable I felt with her. There was no pressure, no judgment, just her. At some point, she leaned over and hugged me. It wasn't just a polite, friendly hug. It was deep and real, like she was trying to take away some of the pain I was carrying. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. But then I pulled back, awkward and unsure. "I can't," I mumbled. "I'm still married." She looked at me, her eyes soft but piercing. "Do you still consider it a marriage?" she asked gently, but the question hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't answer because I didn't need to. We both knew the answer. I just nodded, and before I realized what was happening, we were kissing. It wasn't planned, but it felt right. Under the stars, with the city lights spread out below us, we made love. It was incredible, and it wasn't just about the physical part, though that was amazing too. It was the connection, the closeness, the feeling of being wanted and understood in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Afterward, we drove back to her place. I wasn't ready to go home yet, not to that empty house. We spent the night together, and it wasn't long before we found ourselves making love again. It was like a dam had broken, all the pent-up frustration and emotion pouring out in those few hours. That night, for the first time in what felt like ages, I felt free. And I knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. Not with my wife, not with Emily, and definitely not with me. The next morning, the weight of reality came crashing down. As much as my night with Emily had been a turning point, I still had to face the disaster waiting for me at home. My wife had been exposed, humiliated in front of everyone, and I knew she wasn't going to take that lying down. There was no avoiding the inevitable conversation about the divorce and everything that had gone down. When I walked through the door, she was already there, waiting. The second I stepped inside, the tension was thick enough to choke on. She didn't hold back. "You ruined everything, you idiot," she yelled, her face twisted with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stood there for a moment, letting her words wash over me. Honestly, I had expected something like this. She wasn't the type to take accountability, especially now that she was cornered. "I didn't ruin anything," I replied, my voice calm but steady. "You did that all on your own." Of course, it didn't end there. We argued. How could we not? She hurled insults at me, calling me an idiot, claiming I'd embarrassed her in front of everyone, and even tried to threaten me by saying I'd regret what I'd done. But I wasn't about to let her turn this around on me. "This is on you," I said, not backing down an inch. "And now we're done. I want a divorce." That seemed to hit her harder than I expected. For a split second, I thought she might snap completely, but she held herself together, took a deep breath, and her expression changed. "Fine," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You'll get your divorce. You want out? You'll have it." I left the house after that, needing to clear my head. I thought that would be the worst of it, but I soon found out just how far she was willing to go to make things difficult for me. One day, while I was out running errands for the business, something happened that blindsided me. I was heading back to my car, minding my own business, when I spotted one of her colleagues, a gym rat, not Brandon, but another guy built like a tank. He was standing across the street, and I could tell right away that he was looking for me. There was this unsettling energy about him, like he was just waiting for the right moment. Before I had time to react, he was on me. I didn't stand a chance. Even if I had been prepared, it wouldn't have made a difference. The guy was built for destruction. He threw a punch that knocked me to the ground, and before I knew it, his fists were raining down on me. I remember the sound of my ribs cracking under the force of his blows before everything went dark. When I was in the hospital. A nurse was adjusting the machines I was hooked up to, and across the room, there was an officer waiting. As soon as I was coherent enough, he came over to ask me questions. I couldn't piece everything together right away. It was all a haze of pain and confusion, but eventually it started coming back. The attack. The guy's face. I told the officer everything I could remember. I spent 2 long weeks in that hospital. The doctor said I had a concussion and a broken rib. 2 weeks of lying there, replaying everything over and over in my mind, trying to understand how it had come to this. I had no doubt that my wife was behind it, in one way or another. There was no other reason her colleague would target me like that. She must have been running her mouth, stirring people up. By the end of those 2 weeks, the police had caught the guy. The officer came back, asking if I could identify my attacker. I didn't even hesitate. I pointed him out in the lineup without a second thought. I'll never forget his smug expression, like he thought he could intimidate me even from the other side of that glass. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. He ended up getting 3 years. 3 years for beating the hell out of me, trying to take me down because of some misguided loyalty or lies he believed. I couldn't prove if my wife was directly involved, but by then, I didn't care. The damage was done, and he was the one paying for it. As for me, those weeks in the hospital gave me plenty of time to think. Time to plan. Time to figure out how I was going to close this chapter of my life once and for all. The divorce process was just as messy as you'd imagine. After everything that had already happened, though it felt like a formality more than anything, my marriage had been dead long before I filed the paperwork. Walking into that courtroom was just tying up loose ends, cleaning up the remnants of a life I no longer recognized as mine. Of course, my ex-wife didn't make it easy. She tried to drag the process out, stirring up drama in court like that would somehow change anything. But the truth was, she didn't have much to stand on. We didn't have kids, which in hindsight was probably a blessing. And our finances were mostly separate, thanks to the business being mine alone. She couldn't touch that, and I made damn sure of it. Still, she made noise, blaming me for everything, saying I had humiliated her in front of all our friends, that I'd ruined her reputation. That was the kicker, her reputation, as if she hadn't been the one screwing another guy in a public place. Yet somehow, I was the bad guy. It was absurd, but that's how people like her operate. They twist everything around, make you feel like you're the one who's lost it, like you're the one in the wrong. I didn't take the bait. I let her rant, let her accuse me of being petty, of ruining everything we had. I knew the truth, and so did everyone else who mattered. In the end, the divorce went through, and she walked away with nothing more than her own guilt and whatever scraps she could salvage from the wreckage of her life. I got the house. I got my business. But most importantly, I got my freedom, and that, after everything, was all I needed. During this whole mess, Emily became a constant presence in my life. We never really defined what we were. After everything I'd been through, I wasn't even sure what I wanted or needed. But she was there, steady as a rock. Unlike my ex-wife, Emily didn't try to manipulate or control me. She didn't play games. She was just herself, and honestly, that was more than enough for me. We spent more and more time together as the divorce process dragged on. At first, it was just simple things, dinners at her place, watching movies, having long conversations about life and everything that had gone wrong in mine. But over time, our connection deepened. I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone else in years. She made it easy. She never pushed, never pried, just listened. And for once, I felt like someone actually cared about me for me, not for what I could do for them. By the time my divorce was finalized, I realized Emily wasn't just a shoulder to lean on. She was someone I could see a future with. She had been there for me during my lowest moments, asking for nothing in return. We hadn't put any labels on what we had, but I knew where this was heading. I wasn't in any rush, though. After everything I'd been through, I wanted to take things slow, let them develop naturally. As for my friends, I really don't know how I would have gotten through it all without them. When I got out of the hospital, they were there for me, even the ones I hadn't seen in a while. They visited, cracked jokes, brought me food because, let's be honest, hospital meals are pretty much inedible. They kept me from losing my mind while I was stuck there, bored out of my skull, and frustrated as hell. Each of them played their part. Some offered advice, while others just distracted me, but it meant the world to me. One of my closest friends even admitted, "You know, man, we all thought she was bad news. We just didn't want to say anything." At first, that stung a bit. I thought, why didn't anyone tell me sooner? But then I realized it wouldn't have mattered. I was too deep in it, too blinded by who I thought my wife was. I wouldn't have listened anyway. But they were still there for me, even after the whole thing blew up. That's what real friendship is. They didn't judge me or say, "I told you so." They just had my back. And when you've been through the kind of betrayal I went through, knowing you have people like that in your corner is priceless. Laying in that hospital bed, surrounded by my friends, with Emily by my side, it hit me just how lucky I actually was. Sure, I'd been through hell, but I came out of it with something even more valuable. Real connections with people who genuinely cared about me. It wasn't about material things or appearances. It was about love, support, and authenticity, and that's something money can't buy. The divorce dragged on for months, but when it was finally over, I walked out of that courthouse feeling like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The chapter was closed, and I was free to move forward, to rebuild, to start fresh. And this time, I knew I wasn't going to let anyone drag me down again. Looking back, I see the mistakes I made. I ignored the warning signs. I put my trust in the wrong person. But that's part of life. You live, you learn, and if you're lucky, you come out the other side stronger for it. To anyone reading this, thank you. Thank you for sticking with me through this entire ordeal. Writing it all down, sharing it has been cathartic in ways I never imagined. It helped me process everything. And if my story helps even one person avoid the kind of garbage I went through, then it was all worth it. Take care of yourselves. Be mindful of the people you surround yourself with. Don't let anyone treat you like you're less than you deserve. And most importantly, trust your instincts. They're there for a reason. Good luck.